2 days ago, the US economy was absolutely booming. Inflation risks have roared back with a vengeance. Today, the US economy is in rough shape, maybe near a recession. Inflation has all but disappeared. Two very different interpretations from the same outfit. One was for services, the other manufacturing. Without telling you which was which, guess which one got the most attention? Headlines blaring everywhere. Yep, the inflationary boom. Now ask yourself why that is. The ISM Manufacturing Index suggested the economy is turning a corner, maybe even recovering, with supposedly evidence that inflation risks are rising. You heard that everywhere. However, the ISM's non-manufacturing index indicated the economy is poor and getting worse, and that price conditions have fallen to their most disinflationary in 4 years. Yes, you heard me right. The ISM's non-manufacturing index fell to its lowest since March of 2020. So while the ISM's manufacturing index, which rose to its highest since July of 2022, got all the attention and all the focus, the vastly more important services sector suggests more and more thorough disinflation. So forget the headlines and the agendas. Let's talk about the services economy and see what the balance of evidence really shows. But before we do that, I do want to remind you Eurodollar University is still having its spring sale. It's ongoing for a little bit while longer still. If you ever wonder what Eurodollar University membership is or the Eurodollar University Daily Briefing, here's your chance to find out. The first month is on us, 30 days free. Cancel anytime so there's no risk to you. But in case you do like it, we do have special annual rates on both of those products. And we also have tremendous deals on the daily deep dive analysis where we go much deeper than we do here on YouTube. Special prices, special bundles, lots of information on the Eurodollar University spring sale. That's at our website, conveniently located at eurodollar.university. It's not really just ISM versus ISM, is it? I mean, there's conflicts in data. There's always conflicts in data at any period, but they seem to be heightened in this current state that we're in. We've got the household survey versus the establishment survey going in completely opposite directions. And there are a number of other examples. GDP versus GDI, even though the latest GDI reading was much better. It does tend to be noisy, just like the household survey. But there are tremendous differences in data points that ostensibly should be thinking and looking at the same thing, which is itself an acknowledgement of the difficulties that we find ourselves in this current economic condition. If the economy was legitimately booming, we wouldn't have this many conflicts, nor the degree to which they have attained. You wouldn't have household survey screaming recession and establishment survey screaming absolute boom in the economy. And it's the same with the ISM, though, to be fair, the ISM manufacturing just barely ticked above 50, which is being overhyped and interpreted as proof that the economy must be booming because the lagging manufacturing sector has finally turned a corner. Where have we heard that before? So before getting to the services, let's back up and go. On Monday, the ISM manufacturing came out, and the number was 50.3, which again was its first time above 50 since October 2022. So you can understand to a degree the level of excitement. Here's an index that had suggested manufacturing was in contraction and a sustained contraction for almost a year and a half. And suddenly it pops above 50. Maybe everything's just fine. But we have to keep in mind, too, that after 16 months of contraction, a reading of 50 doesn't actually mean recovery. It means a very small possibility that perhaps the manufacturing sector might be stabilizing. And that would only be the case if we see several more 50s come over the months ahead. One single 50 doesn't mean that much difference, especially since that's in conflict with another group of data, the Federal Reserve Regional Manufacturing Surveys. They suggest the manufacturing sector has not turned a corner and in fact is still contracting. Again, conflicts in the data because of the difficulties of the economy. It's not booming. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these serious differences. And you can see that when you line up the two together, the ISM Manufacturing Index with the average of the five Federal Reserve Regional Manufacturing Surveys, they look weaker. And even the ISM at 50.3 is more consistent with recession and contraction and weakness than not. But the big number that got everybody's attention on Monday was the prices. ISM manufacturing prices came in at 55.8, which is the highest since July of 2022, the supply shock. So just going by the raw numbers and that comparison, it looks as if the manufacturing sector is heating up as oil prices go higher. We're going to be seeing more pass-through costs from energy. At least that's the implication. And the ISM manufacturing was a big deal, according to the mainstream media. I'll give you an example. Here's Bloomberg from a couple days ago. The amount of Fed rate cuts priced into swap contracts for this year dropped to fewer than 65 basis points, less than Fed policymakers themselves had forecast, after a report on ISM manufacturing for March exceeded all estimates in Bloomberg's survey of economists. It was far, far higher than everyone had expected. The ISM report feeds into the narrative coming out of last week, whereby the economy's resilience enables the Fed to, quote, to be patient, said Gregory Farinello, head of U.S. rates trading and strategy for Amerivet Securities. For the bond market, that means rates stay higher for longer. You put all these together, the ISM manufacturing above 50, the highest prices number since July 2022, and the Fed has to stay on hold because supposedly this is evidence of the resilient economy restarting, reigniting inflation pressures. But then what about the ISM services? Manufacturing, as we keep hearing, whenever manufacturing is weak, it's just a small part of the economy. Services is the vast majority. So then why the hype on the manufacturing number, but not the services number? Because the services index was really weak. Even though it was above 50, it's a lot weaker than you might think just hearing that number thrown around. What the ISM reported today was that its non-manufacturing PMI fell to 51.4, which is as low as since December. It's been weak pretty consistently over the last year plus. Furthermore, the prices index fell to 53.4, which was its lowest in 4 years. As I said in the introduction, it hasn't been that low since March of 2020. But what do we make of these ISM services number? Can we corroborate them? What did they actually tell us? We'll start with the number 53. If you take the trend of the ISM non-manufacturing index in basically the 21st century, we can go back a little bit further, but in the 21st century, we get a couple recession cycles and we get a couple non-recession cycles. So it tells us something about the various states of the economy can obtain. And when you draw a line at 53, and yes, that's a sort of an arbitrary line, but as you can see, it's actually not arbitrary. 53 and less, that's where you see economic recessions and near recessions, or those conditions that are very close to recession. There are only a handful of instances, just a very few instances, in the period between 2009 and 2020, for example, where the ISM's non-manufacturing index is less than 53. The vast majority of the time, it is above and well above 53, including in 2019. During that recession scare, which was probably not going to be a recession scare, it's going to be actual recession, other than September of 2019, every single number above 53. And that included most of 2007. Outside of a few months, including December of 2007, the ISM's non-manufacturing index was above 53, as it was in the middle 2000s during the not so booming boom years or the expansion years of the housing bubble era. But you look at the circumstances when the number gets below 53 and is consistently below 53. Obviously, 2008, the Great Recession, but also the first half of 2008. The ISM is just barely below 53 and in many months still above 50. For example, in April 2008, the ISM non-manufacturing was 51.8, which is higher than the March 2024 number we just got. We can also go back to the dot-com recession. Again, clearly that's a recessionary period where the ISM non-manufacturing index falls. It fell below 53 right from the get-go in 2001. A couple months before the official dot-com recession would begin, the ISM non-manufacturing index is below 53 on its way lower. Maybe the best comparison here, as you can see, is the jobless weak non-recovery after the dot-com recession in 2002 and 2003. During that quote unquote jobless recovery, as many people called it, because it was unusually weak, the ISM's non manufacturing index was below 53 on a consistent basis. So below 53 is consistent with clearly weakened periods, whether it be recession in the dot-coms, the Great Recession 2007, 2008, obviously March, April 2020, but also the weak recovery, the weak non-recovery in 2003 that suggested the services economy in the United States is having enormous difficulties. It's not booming, it's certainly not inflationary. Now, what do we make of the prices number? So the prices index for the non-manufacturing sector, according to ISM, lowest since March of 2020, which is a ridiculous comparison, but it's also among some of the lowest in the series. And we can corroborate the ISM's prices index with the PCE deflator. Start out with the PCE deflator, which is the Fed's preferred method of measuring consumer prices. And what you find is that this ISM prices index lines up pretty darn closely with the PCE deflator. Now, nothing is ever perfect and the correlations are never exact, but this is pretty remarkably close. There is a high degree of correlation there. And at the very least, the directions are the same. When the ISM index is falling, when it's going down, you better believe the annual rate of price increases, according to the PCE deflator, are also disinflating. A couple of pretty good examples where the ISM index is actually leading the PCE deflator: 2011. The ISM prices index topped in April of that year, while the PCE deflator finally hit its peak at 3%, or just above 3%, in September 2011. So the ISM was actually leading consumer prices lower during what was Eurodollar number 2. We also see that to an extent in the supply shock era. In 2022, the ISM peaked in April of that year, while the PCE deflator finally topped out at 7% in June of 2022. These are before rate hikes, remember. So in other words, the ISM's non-manufacturing price index also corroborated by consumer price measures themselves, which suggests that maybe we should be paying attention to what the price index is suggesting. More thoroughly disinflationary. Despite some recent volatility in the index, there's always month-to-month variations in these things. It has been consistently lower over that last little while here, the last period of disinflation. It does not indicate that price pressures across the vastly larger services economy are about to get restarted, despite the fact that oil prices and gasoline prices have gone up here recently. Instead, because we see the weakness in the headline number, it suggests the U.S. economy is really struggling here. One final piece of correlation, actually a couple pieces of correlation, in addition to the ISM non-manufacturing survey suggesting weakness in the service economy, we can also line up that index with other services sector PMIs too, like the Fed's regional survey. Now, the Richmond Fed survey, which is only the mid-Atlantic region, but that's the one that goes back the farthest to almost the turn of the century. We line up the Richmond Fed's non-manufacturing survey with the ISM services survey, and the Richmond Fed is obviously more volatile on a short-run basis, but they are a very close match too. And in fact, the Richmond Fed survey suggests the services sector in the U.S. economy currently is even weaker than the ISM does. And we can point to other regional Fed surveys for the services sector, which suggests the same thing. Here I'm going to show you the Dallas Fed's regional survey. That one, which only goes back to 2007, but still, even though the Dallas Fed tends to be much weaker to the downside, there is a solid correlation there. Weakness in the U.S. services economy indicated by the ISM's number. But it was the manufacturing index which got all the love. Everybody wants to hype the booming and inflationary economy. And the inflationary economy, they actually want to hype that because it suggests the economy is booming. It all ties together with a specific agenda, if you haven't noticed already. So while we look at the ISM and it gets held up as proof that the economy is doing great and that inflation is about to be resurgent, we're not supposed to look at the ISM services sector, the vastly larger part of the U.S. economy, arguably the more important part of the U.S. economy, how it relates to global economic weakness, And the numbers there that suggest not only a struggling US economy, but also an increasingly disinflationary system because of those struggles. So the services numbers, more importantly, stuck at levels that are consistent, corroborated with weak periods, even mild recession. And they're corroborated by mainstream sources and other numbers like the PCE deflator. So while they're ready to tell you that the economy is robust, manufacturing has turned a corner, it's about to recover, what do we make of all this other evidence that doesn't fit so neatly in the soft landing box? To ask that question is to answer it. There are a number of market indications also suggesting the global economy, not just the US, is really struggling too. I talked about copper to gold. That's in the video link below. As always, thank you very much for joining me. There's a few days left at the Eurodollar University Spring Sale. Check that out. If you're a member or subscriber, I cannot thank you enough. And until next time, take care.